Hey everyone, and welcome to the first alt history video, and today I'm going to be talking about something that actually almost happened in our timeline, a Jewish Uganda. The idea had been kicked around since the late 19th century as Zionism was on the rise and the increasing anti-Semitism across Europe was also on the rise. The British Foreign Minister Joseph Chamberlain had offered up Uganda to the Jews to create a homeland for them, since many thought at the time Palestine would be a bit too difficult of a task for them to receive. Theodor Herzl, arguably one of the most important Zionists of the time, was very hopeful about this plan, and him, the Zionists, and the British government had sent out an expedition to go explore the area of Uganda for settlement. The only reason the project failed in our timeline was because the natives were unfriendly and there were actually too many lions that they were scared of. Let's say, for the sake of this video, that the unfriendly natives weren't an issue and that they weren't too scared of lions, as, look at Israel right now. They have a lot of unfriendly natives and they seem to be doing just fine. The creation of Jewish Uganda would be approved in 1905, and the British would send out a mandate offering any Jew who moved to the country citizenship after the new state had gained full independence. Over the next few years, Jews from Europe and North Africa would make the long journey to their new homeland in sub-Saharan Africa, using two main routes, south through the Nile and west through the port of Mombasa in Kenya. To avoid overcrowding in the only city that the nation had, which would be modern-day Kampala, the nation would enact something similar to the American Homestead Act, giving any Jew that moved to Uganda 100 acres of land. The granting of land tracts would lead to conflicts with the natives and some of the surrounding colonies over the years, but these would slowly start to fade as the natives would most likely be slaughtered and the surrounding colonies would be subdued by their colonial overlord. With World War I starting and coming to a close, the Jewish state of Uganda would be granted independence and would likely see its largest wave of immigration yet. As many Jews in Europe were blamed for World War I and the failings of Germany, they would have their assets stripped and most likely forced to march down through the Nile and forced to go to Uganda. They would have been joined by the Jews from the Soviet Union fleeing Stalin's purges of the late 1920s and early 1930s. This would bring with it many negatives and positives, as the population of the country would swell from just about 3 million in 1915 to 15 million by 1930, with nearly 90% of the world's Jews living in Uganda by choice or by force during this time. With such a large population, food security would be the main focus of the country, having to import large quantities of food from India and surrounding European colonies, as the nation couldn't quite support itself off of the small-scale agriculture that they had. However, the large population boost would also help with economic booms in almost every sector. The nation's capital would become the largest banking center in not just sub-Saharan Africa, but all of Africa, rivaling those of London and New York at the time, also helping to boost economic output that would later on help their agricultural sector. This would put Jewish Uganda in a weird spot, being the only country in Africa, not just sub-Saharan, but all of Africa, that was somewhat prosperous, putting it on a level somewhere around Japan of the 1930s. This medium to large industrial power would be needed as World War II would break out and with the German invasion of Poland. After the collapse of France in 1940, they would join the Allies and help them push out the Italians in East Africa. They would also push north, helping the British defend Egypt, stopping the Italians in Rambo before they could even enter the Egyptian territory. With their help, Operation Torch could begin a year sooner than in our timeline, invading the Italian peninsula and avoiding a costly D-Day invasion in Normandy. This would help end World War II in late 1934, 2 years before it did in our time. After the war, Jewish Uganda would receive massive funding from the Americans as part of the Marshall Plan. Even though they weren't in Europe, they would be considered a largely European nation. This massive Marshall Fund planning would be used to build new roads and rail connections, this mostly going through Uganda to help them get markets in the global world through the port of Mombasa. As decolonization would begin in the 1950s, Jewish Uganda would serve as the economic and industrial hub of Eastern and Central Africa, providing goods to stabilize the countries and help them industrialize faster than in our timeline. This large industrial power in Eastern Africa would be the main bulwark against communism, supporting Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, Mobutu in the Congo, as well as providing logistical support to the Portuguese and Rhodesians and South Africans in Southern Africa. Well, that is all for today's video. I hope you all enjoyed, and if you'd like to help provide new ideas to this, there is a link to the Discord in the description, and I will see you all in 2 weeks.